Hello everyone. Welcome to lecture 3 of module 11. I am Stuti Goswami, and in this session we will be acquainted with one of the most crucial stages of the publishing process, proofreading and revising. We will learn about the importance of revision in the editing process, and we will also be acquainted with a few basic proofreading tools. We will also in this lecture learn about some fundamental differences between copy editing and proofreading. Now, why is revision and proofreading so important? Before proceeding further, here is a quick recap of the publishing process from writing to publication. In the first step, the writer writes, revises, and also edits. For any creative artist, for any creative writer, whether it is fiction or non-fiction, self-editing, revision and self-editing are of utmost importance for any writer. Once the writer is convinced that their manuscript, their text is ready to be sent to the publisher, the writer sends the text or the manuscript actually to be published. Now, if it is a magazine or if it is a newspaper, the manuscript runs through the editing process under the supervision of an editor. If the manuscript is a chapter of an edited anthology, a round of editing takes place at the level of the editor of that anthology, post which that anthology as one manuscript is sent to the publisher. In this case, and also if the manuscript that a writer sends is a book, then also, of course, it is sent directly to the publisher. In these cases, the manuscript as an anthology or as a book enters the publishing house primarily through interaction with the acquisitions editor or the commissioning editor, after which that manuscript goes through rounds of editing and copy editing, of course. Once this is done, the layout and design of the book are prepared and the first proof comes out, and the proofreader now takes up that first proof and goes through the manuscript threadbare. Now, the proofreader could be an in-house proofreader of the publishing house, or it could be a professional proofreader to whom these proofs are outsourced. In either case, the proofreader will check for mistakes, errors, make corrections, mark out corrections to be made, and also ensures and checks for consistency. In some cases, the editor themselves play the role and responsibility of a proofreader. This is specially witnessed in a lot of smaller publishing houses. Once the first proof is done, the typesetter makes the corrections as marked out in the document by the proofreader. After the corrections are made, after the changes are made, a second proof is prepared. The proofreader, and it could also be the writer of that particular book or the editor of that particular anthology or the writer of a particular essay or poem that is a part of that anthology, will now check the second proof or the third proof as may be applicable for any mistakes, etc., and sends back the checked document. Now, this actually is repeated multiple times. In some cases, still there are no mistakes or errors of any sort in the manuscript, and that is approved as final. Once that is done, the electronic files are sent to the printer with necessary instructions. Meanwhile, the production manager, the editor, the designer of the book, the cover, the proofreader, writer, everyone else involved in the process may make a final check, and after that, the manuscript is sent to be printed. From this, it is evident how revision is so fundamental in the process of editing and in the whole publishing process. Now, let's come to proofreading. In creative writing, particularly, or in any kind of writing, in publishing, in the publishing process, proofreading means polishing a manuscript without affecting in any way the texture of the author's voice or without touching in any way the arguments of the author in that particular text. The proofreader, in fact, comes at the end of a long process of publishing, from writing to sending it for print, and therefore, the proofreader's work is of utmost significance to check for any technical slips, any typographical errors, or any errors of any sort, or any omission that may have been missed out in the preceding stages. But at the same time, it is also the proofreader's responsibility to look out for any parts of the text where the pace or the speed may have slackened, where the tone may be uneven, and where the authorial or the editorial voice is impacted by extraneous factors in the text. So now, what is proofreading? Of course, it is the final stage of the writing process, and it focuses on errors like spelling, punctuation, syntax, grammar, formatting. But proofreading is, like has already been said, not only about spotting typographical errors on such errors. Proofreading also involves checking for consistent formatting. Now, when we say formatting, we have to understand fonts. Choice of fonts is, of course, something that is determined earlier in particularly the design and the layout. Even then, checking the fonts, the size of the fonts, the consistency of the use of fonts, margins, line spacing, paragraph spacing, of course, citation in case of quotes that need to be cited, checking for formatting of referencing, to mention a few. Proofreading also, at the same time, involves verifying the accuracy of citations and references in order to ensure no case of plagiarism or copyright infringement at any level, or even IPR violation. Next, the proofreader also has to ensure the correct use of abbreviations, the correct use of punctuations, the correct use of syllabification, correct capitalization, and italicization. And next, double checking titles, headers, and numbering systems. So, good proofreading ensures that a document looks or is professional and it communicates clearly.
Proofreading is the final stage in the revision process. Proofreading allows you to catch small errors, such as typos or misspellings that you missed while revising, and even while editing your writing. This video will cover some of the things to remember when you are proofreading. Make proper use of spell checker. Spell checker is a handy tool to use when looking at misspelled words. For example, the word exaggerate. Remember to change your spell checker's language settings to Canadian English from American Standard English. Spell checker misses words that are spelled correctly but are out of place. For example, the girl the dog bought, instead of the girl bought the dog. Always proofread a hard copy. Proofreading on a computer screen can be hard because you cannot refer back to the changes you've made. It is much easier to print out a copy of the essay and then make changes on the page with a pencil. Read the essay out loud. Many errors are missed when you read in your head, whereas when you read out loud, you can see and hear when something is wrong. such as when a word has been left out or a subject and verb don't agree. Read every word. Don't skim read. Make sure you are reading every word in the order it is found on the page. People have a tendency to correct their mistakes orally as they are reading, and leave off suffix endings. Break down sentences. If you have problems with things like subject-verb agreements, break questionable sentences down into their parts. Underline the subject of the sentence once, the verb twice, and make sure that they agree. Remember that plural verbs have a singular ending, and singular verbs have a plural ending. For example, you can say, the girls walk, or the girl walks, but not the girls walk or the girl walk. Decide at the beginning of the paper if you are writing in present, past, or future tense. Check your verbs to make sure that these tenses remain consistent. Learn when to capitalize. Capitalization may seem unimportant, but can save you easily lost marks. Only capitalize proper names and not common nouns. Read backwards. Reading backwards removes sentences from the context of their paragraph. It can help you spot errors by letting you focus on the words and not the meaning of the paragraph. Work paragraph by paragraph. Start with the last sentence in the paragraph and read it for coherence. Does the sentence make sense on its own? Is it a sentence fragment? Know your style guides. Pay attention to whether you are supposed to use MLA style or APA style or another style when writing. Each has specific rules for citation, bibliography, footnotes, quotations, etc. Have someone else read it. A second person may catch things that you've missed because you are too close to the writing and you are already familiar with what has been written. A second person can also let you know if the paper makes sense to them and may notice incomplete sentences or small grammatical errors. Leave time for proofreading. After you're finished with the paper, leave yourself enough time so that you can step away from the paper for a while.
It is essential that proofreaders are consistently accurate in their proofreading work, as they, like has been said before, take up the last stage of typographic production of a manuscript before it is sent to print. Now we come to the difference between copy editing and proofreading. Copy editing and proofreading really serve different purposes, but often they are confused for the other. Copy editing comes much earlier in the whole process of production of a text from the written to the printed form, and proofreading comes much later. And yet there are some overlaps between the two. However, we have to remember that proofreaders do not have editorial authority to make any major alterations. They only highlight or mark the queries for the typesetters, editors, or authors to take cognizance of and make necessary changes. Creativity. In fact, creative writing and creative thinking are oftentimes in conflict with the strict regimen that professional proofreading requires. Let us take an example. A poem may, for semiotic purposes, have words broken up into segments, or for the desired impact on the reader, may have words that are broken up into segments. But from the perspective of a proofreader, that spacing may come across as incorrect. But for the copy editor, that spacing of words may be essential to maintain the flow of that particular poem's narrative or for the desired impact on the reader. It is in such circumstances that the creative quality of a proofreader comes to the fore. The proofreader, therefore, has to be well versed with different styles of writing, different genres and subgenres of writing, also the newer trends in writing of whichever genre it may belong to. It is very, very essential for the proofreader also Like the copy editor, the proofreader also needs to have a decent command, or at least it is helpful for the proofreader to have a decent command over the language of the text. In The Importance of the Proofreader, a paper read before the Club of Odd Volumes in Boston, John Wilson says that the true proofreader should not only be a practical printer, but he should be a lover of literature, someone who is familiar with the classics of all language, with the results accomplished by science, and indeed with every subject that concerns his fellow men. Of course, to many, this may seem like a tall order, but the essence of what John Wilson says is that a proofreader is not only someone who will be engaged in looking after the technical aspects of a document or of a text or of a manuscript, a typescript rather, but the proofreader is someone who also should be sensitive as well as sensible towards the various trends of writing, towards various styles of literature and other domains of writing. So, proofreading and editing are fundamentally separate responsibilities. In contrast to proofreaders, copy editors particularly focus on sentence to sentence analysis of the text to improve the grammar, spelling, punctuation, syntax, and structure. As we have already touched upon in the previous video, copy editing is focused on style, on content, on grammar, syntax, punctuation, as well as on consistency of words and phrase, use of words and phrases. Of course, it goes without saying that copy editing and proofreading are equally significant in the publishing process. While the copy editor fine-tunes the text for clarity, precision, and conciseness of the text, proofreading itself being the last stage of the whole editing and the whole publishing process almost, focuses on a threadbare reading of the edited text to ensure that the text is free from any kind of typographical errors, spelling errors, stylistic errors, and punctuational errors and inconsistency, and is made ready to be sent to print. If we make a comparison between copy editing and proofreading, we will see how in one case, that is the case of copy editing, it may involve rewording or rephrasing of sentences, or could even be at times, if deemed very essential, restructuring of paragraphs. Proofreading involves minor corrections. If copy editing focuses on clarity of the language, clarity of argument, on the tone and on the flow of narrative, proofreading focuses on what one may even call surface errors that are equally significant. Copy editing, of course, like we have already said, comes early in the process, so there are possibilities of certain errors or omissions or inconsistencies that remain in the text, and it is the proofreader's responsibility to make a final check before publication to ensure that there are no mistakes or inconsistencies at all, and the typescript is error-free and ready to print. Now we come to a few basic proofreading tools. One, of course, are spell checkers. Spell checkers and grammar tools are used a lot in recent times. However, traditionally, proofreading is still done in hard copies, in printed forms, and in that case, the various proofreading marks are used by the proofreader. Number two, text-to-speech tools. Now, it is not necessarily something that proofreaders often prefer, but it is used to hear how the writing sounds. Creative writers often employ such tools while revising their work. Number three, of course, the style guides. In USA and in Northern America, for example, we have American Psychological Association, APA, or Modern Language Association, MLA, or Chicago Manual of Style, or such other style guides that are used. While in the United Kingdom, we have style guides like the Hearth Style Guide. Apart from this, different publishing houses, often, and even for that matter, magazines and journals often have their own style guidelines for contributors and editors to follow. Number four, hard copy review. So, a lot of times, seeing a typescript that is edited on paper reveals more errors, and it also is something that traditionally proofreaders have always preferred. Number five, reading backwards. Not all proofreaders prefer this, but it actually helps a lot of times to find out spelling errors and punctuations in the text because the mind is not caught up with the semiotics of the sentences and the expressions. Sometimes, number six, peer review. Sometimes proofreaders also like or prefer to have a document that is proofread shown to another person because it offers fresh perspective, and oftentimes errors that may have been missed despite the threadbare nature of the proofreader's reading and revising of that document are found out. Now we can see a few proofreading symbols. Of course, once again, it has to be remembered that different style guides may have different proofreading marks for this same error. Proofreading marks are to be marked on the margins, and there's ones that we can see on the slide are of deleting character, deleting word. Then there is, as we can see, closing up of space. Sometimes in typing, there might be spaces unnecessarily, spaces between letters of a particular word. Now, this is different from breaking up a word into two parts, the syllabification that we talked about in a previous video. The next mark is of deleting and closing up of space. So if there is a mistake of same letter unnecessarily being typed more than once, then when we delete one of that characters, one of that letter, then it is important for the proofreader to also mark the closing up of space. Sometimes uppercase letters are used unnecessarily where it should be lowercase, and vice versa. Then we use these marks. Sometimes certain words need to be in italics, but they are not printed or typed in italics, and that again is to be marked out. Again, sometimes period or commas and such other punctuation marks are not used, they are missed out, sometimes they are used in the wrong way, and in those cases also different proofreading marks are there for the proofreader to use in order to ensure that those corrections are made before the text is sent to print. Others that we can see here are inserting of semicolon, colon, inserting of quote marks, apostrophes, and characters. These were some of the proofreading marks that are used by proofreaders. Now, before we wind up the discussions of this video, we have to talk about why revision matters. Now, from writing to publishing, in this entire process, there are constant revisions that take place in a text. Now, when we say revision, we have to understand it as revisioning, which means looking once again at what has been written before or what has been typed in the manuscript. So, revision is not simply correction of typographical errors or spelling mistakes. Revision actually entails rethinking of ideas, refining arguments, and restructuring paragraphs and content to make the writing more effective and engaging. Now, whether it is the writer who revises their writing before sending it to be published or sending it to the publisher, or the editor, or the language editor, or the copy editor, or the proofreader for that matter, in each case, there is revision involved. So, in many ways, is revision involved in this whole process from writing to publishing. Revision itself can be said to be akin to a creative act. So, apart from the writer, the editor, the copy editor, or the proofreader ultimately engage in revising a manuscript through their respective roles and responsibilities. In case of creative writing particularly, revision is of utmost significance because creative writing involves much greater degree of experimentation than academic or research writing. There also revision is important, but the thrust would be more in terms of the academic rigor of the writing or of the factual information, to mention a few. In case of creative writing, whether it is creative fiction or creative non-fiction, the writer can have many avenues of playing with words, playing with expressions, of using words in a new manner in a bid to add layers of meaning to a word or an expression. A lot of times, poetry, for example, involves a much greater degree of experimentation when it comes to using of words, phrases, expressions, the use of symbols and metaphors and images. So in those cases, revision is both essential and at the same time, revision is also important to sharpen the dialogue. This is true again in case of creative fiction, for example. A character may belong to a particular stratum of society, but the dialogue of that character in a particular situation may not be convincing of that character's play stratum of society or that character's difficult circumstance. In such cases, editors have a major role to play. Likewise, we can talk about revision of imagery. Now, when a poet uses a particular imagery in a bid to convey a particular kind of meaning or to give expression to a particular kind of emotion or state of mind, the editor needs to attempt to at least go into the mind of the poet in a bid to understand the use of imagery, if the imagery is to be made even more vivid or even more evocative. Evocative quality of imagery of poetry and language is very essential. For that matter, evocative quality of language of creative fiction particularly and creative non-fiction also, as it may be applicable, is very important for the editors to be mindful of. Same goes for the pacing of narrative of a text. Next, revision is also important to eliminate cliches or jargon-laden language or to eliminate any kind of sweeping statements or generic statements. Use of cliches in a text lowers the weight of argument or the intensity of emotion or argument of a text. So the editors, while revising, have to be mindful of that. The same goes for the use of language. Language, as has been mentioned before, has to be taught, and at the same time, it should come across as organic, and this is essential for the text of whichever genre it might belong to have the desired impact on the reader. Further, revision is also important to identify gaps or inconsistencies of language, fact, information, argument, logic, or style. In this, whether it is the writer or the editor or the copy editor or the proofreader, each has an important role to play, because the ultimate objective of any printed work of writing is readability, reader engagement, in order to give the readers an immersive experience. One thing that we have to remember is that even the best of writers, even the greatest of poets, may need and do need revision in their writings. So whether it is the writer revising or the editor or the proofreader, and once again, the proofreader's role is very, very important, because it is not about fixing mistakes. It is about ensuring that the text is in its best possible form as it goes to print and as it goes to the readers to be read. After all, proofreading and editing, in fact, is not about correcting mistakes or marking out errors. It is about showing respect to the author, more importantly, showing respect to the reader, and it is indicative of the pride that the editor or the proofreader takes in their work. Thank you.